Welcome to week 4 of our pronunciation course. This week we have the very interesting topic of pronunciation and reading. In particular, we're going to be looking at phonics. Before we do, let's take a moment to quickly recap the goals from last week. And by now you should be able to provide your own definitions of speaking and pronunciation, to describe different approaches to teaching speaking, to understand the relationship between various components of the spoken language, to describe how speaking is taught in prominent language teaching methods used over the years, to appreciate the important role of pronunciation in helping learners increase the comprehensibility when they speak English. Returning now to this week, let's have a look at the goals for pronunciation and reading, phonics. By the end of this week, you should be able to demonstrate familiarity with practical classroom techniques for teaching reading and pronunciation, to differentiate bottom-up processing and top-down processing in reading, to explain the two approaches used to teach reading and the criticisms of both, to discuss the various steps of teaching reading and pronunciation using the phonics approach, to provide your own examples for teaching reading through phonics, and finally you should be able to explain intensive reading and extensive reading. To begin our look this week at pronunciation and reading, we're going to listen to Dr. Noonan share his observations on the topic.
Why do we teach reading? Very often, particularly in lower level courses for beginners, we teach reading for reinforcement of the oral language, and the reading elements are really there simply to give the visual learners an opportunity to draw on their strengths, but basically to reinforce the spoken language. Of course, once we get into more complex, higher levels of proficiency, and once we start working with learners who want to study through the medium of English, then we need to start introducing programs of academic English where specific reading skills are developed. And again, coming back to one of the themes of this course, a strategies-based approach is a very good one for developing reading skills. Strategies such as skimming and scanning, also the skill of inferencing. Very often learners are very good at extracting factual information that exists in a text, but a lot of the reading we do requires making inferences, what's called reading between the lines, identifying information, attitudinal and factual information that is not explicitly stated in the text, but is in fact implied. There's also the issue of the purposes for reading. As I said, I guess the two general purposes are reading in order to reinforce spoken language and then reading in its own right. The fact is that in many situations these days as well, learners exist very much in an oral culture rather than in a literate culture, and they do lots and lots of watching of television and so on, playing of video games, but relatively little reading. Again, I think it's important as educators for us to encourage learners to read and to see reading and the development of reading as an important cognitive skill. Another aspect of the reading process that one ought to keep in mind is the cross-cultural nature of reading, and that different cultures have different purposes for reading. It's interesting to take an inventory of the amount of reading that we do over a week, and I sometimes, when I do this, I share this with my learners and encourage them to keep records of the reading that they do, and simply asking them to keep a record of the things that they read, not only in English but also in their own language, actually increases the amount of reading that they do. Simply putting reading on the agenda by saying, we'll make a note of the amount of reading that you've done this week, seems to increase the amount of attention that they devote to reading. Another point relates to top-down versus bottom-up processing. The reader uses knowledge of individual letter sounds in order to figure out what a sentence or a passage is all about. But then if they can use top-down processes, their background knowledge of the content in question, then their reading is going to be much more effective. And they can compensate, they can use that knowledge to compensate, for example, for unknown words and so on. Again, the temptation by beginning readers is to want to understand every single word that they're reading, and it's important, just as I mentioned in relation to listening, it's important to develop learner flexibility and to get them to see that we don't listen to every passage in the same way. The same with reading. We don't read every passage we come across in exactly the same way. We'll read a legal contract for the purchase, say, of our very first house in a very different way from how we'll read Dilbert in or some other cartoon in the daily newspaper. And so developing a range of reading strategies and then learning to match those strategies to our purposes in reading in the first place is very important.
We're now going to listen to Dr. Noonan once more, and this time he's being interviewed by my colleague Mr. David Bracey, and they're going to be having a further look at phonics.
Phonics is an approach to the teaching of initial reading based on teaching the learners the relationship between the sounds and symbols. So what we do is to basically use stories and sentences and utterances that have regular sound-symbol correspondences. One of the complications is that, well, there are a number of complications, one of which is the fact that we only have 26 letters of the alphabet to represent almost double the number of sounds, and also the fact that we have, and I won't go into the details and intricacies of the evolution of the relationship between sounds and symbols, but basically we have certain letter combinations that actually bear no resemblance to the kind of the root sound of a particular letter of the alphabet. So you know, GH is a classic. You know, we have all sorts of weird and wonderful sounds that are represented by the GH letter combination. So one of the problems is that there is this lack of correspondence in many instances between the sounds and the symbols. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't use phonics to teach learners the rudiments of reading. And it's why, and I'm sure that you, even as a child in Canada, you had the Dick and Jane readers. I did in Australia as a kid, yes. You know. Yes. And they were basically phonics based, and the sounds, the words that were used in those readers were all words that had regular sound symbol correspondences. So you won't find people whose name is Goff, for example. You know, it'll be Dick, it'll be Jane, it'll be Spot the dog.
Right.
Yes. And it's for that reason. One of the criticisms that has been made of the phonics approach is the fact that fluent readers don't read by sounding out the individual alphabetic letters in a word, because if we did that, we'd forget the beginning of the sentence before we got to the end of it. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't let learners in on the secret. Okay, that there are, even though the relationship between sounds and symbols is in many instances indirect, there are many words where the relationship is quite a direct one, and so therefore it's a tool for learners to become fluent. Once they become fluent, then they can identify a word immediately, right. Through basically by identifying the shape of the word. And I think it's a mistake for people to argue that we should use the whole word approach. That's the alternative approach. Phonics was unpopular for quite a few years in elementary schools because the argument was, well, fluent readers don't sound out individual letters, so beginning readers shouldn't. And I think that's a non sequitur. It it doesn't hold up. And so the proponents of the whole word approach argued that we should be teaching learners to identify a word in the same way as fluent readers identify a word by its unique shape. But I think to deny learners the opportunity to see the systematic relationship between sounds and symbols is basically to deny them an opportunity to actually have this additional tool for acquiring the ability to read.
Now you're mentioning how learners learn how to read a word just by the shape, and I just happened to see an example of this last week with my nephew. He's 4 years old. He can't read at all.
Right.
But he was being babysat by his grandmother, and he really wanted to see the animated movie Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, right.
And so he brought a DVD to his grandmother and said he wanted to watch it.
Right.
And the DVD he brought was Romeo and Juliet.
Okay.
So he couldn't read it, but he could just tell that there was something similar between Romeo and Juliet and Romeo and Juliet.
Right. That's a lovely story, lovely example. Yes.
Yeah.
But yes, obviously kids, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we use both. I mean, as I said earlier, there are certain sounds that where there's no systematic correspondence between the letter and the sound that it makes. And so, for example, the O in women, logically women should be spelt W-I-M. Not W-O-M.
Right.
And so they have to learn those particular irregular forms just through sight.
Right.
And for that reason, when we're teaching learners to read, we should be using lowercase letters rather than uppercase letters, because there's more discrimination there. When you think, you know, like a B or a P or a T, you know, sticks up or down below the lines, whereas uppercase, they're all the same. And there's some evidence to suggest that learners will acquire the ability to read more quickly if you actually teach them lowercase rather than uppercase.
Well, for the remainder of this week's presentation, we will be discussing the phonics approach to reading in detail. Now, generally, when we talk about phonics, a couple of things come to mind. And those things are reading and spelling. This means, of course, then that there is a focus on reading and the beginning stages of writing. Well, this week we're focusing on reading, particularly on the phonics approach and on pronunciation. So thus, this integrates the skills of listening and speaking. Now, when someone reads a text to the learners, it might be a teacher reading, it might be a CD that's playing, or it might be a website that is reading a text to the learners. Of course, the learners are there listening to the text. But in addition to listening, they can do other things. They can listen and repeat parts of the text with the help of the teacher. The learners can answer questions about the text. And they can discuss the text with one another. So therefore, when teaching reading to young learners, it's important to integrate the 4 macro skills. And the 4 macro skills, of course, are reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Now, this brings us to an important note about the 4 macro skills. The first thing that learners will be doing is listening. So first, the learners learn to listen. Next, they learn to speak. The third macro skill that they learn is to read. And finally, they learn the 4th macro skill, they learn to write. Now, bearing this in mind, when you're using the phonics approach for teaching reading, it's important to consider the learner's developmental stage and what they can and cannot do in their first language. The phonics approach is commonly used to teach the initial stages of the reading process. And as Dr. Noonan mentioned earlier, phonics is based on teaching the learners the relationship between sounds and symbols, symbols being generally letters. So as we think about that, I'd like to share a quote with you from the researcher Anderson. He observed that students start with the fundamental basics of letter and sound recognition, which in turn allows for morpheme recognition, followed by word recognition, building to the identification of grammatical structures, sentences, and longer texts. Well, let's look now at the steps of teaching reading with the phonics approach. And these steps are from letters to clusters of letters to words to sentences and eventually to texts. Firstly, let's look at matching vowel and consonant sounds to the letters they represent. When teaching phonics to learners, teachers first focus on teaching the vowel sounds and the consonant sounds and the letters which correspond to these sounds. So, the learners need to know that the letter A makes the sound A, as in apple. The letter B makes the sound B, as in banana. The letter C makes the sound K, as in cat. And of course this continues with the remaining sounds of the English language. Well, here we have an example which shows the various letters and words, and it shows their corresponding sounds. So let's go through this alphabet chart now together. It goes through all the letters from A to Z. To begin, we have the letter A, or the A sound, as in apple. The letter B, or the B sound, as in bat. The letter C, which is the K sound, as in cat. The letter D, which has the D sound, as in dog. The letter E sound, which has the E sound, as in ed. And also, of course, that's the same sound there for elephant. The letter F, with the F sound, as in fun. The letter G, which has the G sound, as in game. The letter H, which has the sound H, as in hat. The letter I, which is for the sound I, as in igloo. The letter J, or the sound J, as in jug. The letter K has the sound K, as in kite. The letter L, which has the L sound, as in lamp. The letter M, which has the sound M, as in man. We have the letter N, or the N sound, as in nut. The letter O, which has the O sound, as in octopus. Here we have the letter P, or the P sound, as in pan. Next we have the letter Q, and you can see it's presented here with Q and U, and those two letters very often go together. The sound you have here is K, as in queen. We also have the letter R, or the R sound, as in rat. Next we have the letter S, or the S sound, as in snake. Next we have the T with the sound T, as in top. As you can see now, we have the letter U with the sound as in up. Here we have the letter V with the V sound, as in van. Next we have the letter W with the W sound, as in wind. We also have the letter X, which has the sound X, as in fox. Now we have the letter Y, which has the Y sound, as in yellow. Finally, we have the letter Z, with the Z sound, as in zebra. Now, as we think about these vowel sounds and the consonant sounds, as the teacher, when you're choosing which vowel sounds or which consonant sounds to introduce to the students, it's important that you choose words with those sounds that the learners already know. These might be words that they know in listening or in speaking, or words that are a part of their everyday lives. Choosing familiar words for the learners really helps them in making connections to what they already know, and this will help reduce the learning burden as well. It's always important to remember that the focus is on teaching the sound-symbol correspondence. Therefore, if, say, a teacher decides to use the word girl or goat to represent the G sound, this is great if the child already knows the word or encounters the word in their everyday life. It would not make any sense, for example, to choose a word such as apprehension to teach the A sound, or the word bankruptcy to teach the B sound, because I doubt that young learners in their first language would know the words apprehension and bankruptcy. There are many different ways that we can teach sound-symbol correspondence. And with all of these activities that I'm going to share with you in this presentation, it's important that the teacher helps to make connections between the letters, the symbols, and the corresponding sounds. For example, the teacher can have various objects or pictures in the room which represent the sound being practiced. In order to reinforce the sound-symbol correspondence, it's best if the pictures have both the letter and the sound represented. For instance, the letter A. For this, the letter A, the teacher can have an apple, an alligator, an ant, etc. Also, learners might enjoy having some pages to colour in, and the pages would show the objects bearing the sound that you're working on. Well, as I mentioned, there are a number of different ways that we can teach this to our young learners. So let's have a look at some of those now. We're going to begin with the use of songs. And these will be songs that help us to teach letter-symbol correspondence. And this particular song, we're going to be looking at the short A, or A sound. I am learning letter A, letter A, letter A. I am learning letter A, 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 A. And of course, as the teacher, you can create your own fun songs for teaching the young learners a new sound-symbol correspondence. We're now going to look at an animal song, and this song will be sung to the tune of Wheels on the Bus. Now, in this activity, the teacher is recycling sounds, letters, and some vocabulary from previous lessons. The class is doing a lesson on objects, such as animals, cars, trucks, and the sounds that these objects make. The teacher uses an overhead projector or board and writes the words to the following song. The cows in the barn go moo, 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 moo. The cows in the barn go moo, moo, moo. How about you? The teacher gives a selection of letters to the learners for the animal sounds, and the learner's task is to pull out the letters that they need to make the animal sounds that they hear in the song. Alternatively, the teacher could do the same for the names of the animals. The ducks in the pond go quack, 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 quack. The ducks in the pond go quack, quack, quack. How about that? Another idea is for the teacher to change the words once more, and this time to reflect a transportation theme. In this version, we're looking at cars. The cars on the road go vroom, 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 vroom. The cars on the road go vroom, 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 give them some room. The trucks on the street go beep, 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 beep. The trucks on the street go beep, 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 don't go to sleep. At the end of the song, depending on what verses the teacher and class have sung, the students should have the words moo, quack, vroom and beep spelled out in front of them. Let's have another example. This one is what we call a listening game, and this requires students to listen for the sound e, as in the beginning of elbow or echo. So they need to pay attention and listen for that e sound. So what they do is when they hear a word that begins with the e sound, they touch their elbow. If they hear a word that does not begin with the e sound, they keep their hands in their laps. So let's look at an example. Let's say the teacher read out the following words. Ant, well, that doesn't begin with e, so the student would have their hands in their laps. Egg, that begins with the sound e, so they touch their elbow. Dog, their hands would be in their laps. Enjoy. Elephant. Boat. Hat. Energy. Monkey. Elbow. Banana. Empty. Pencil. Envelope. And you can see, I'm sure, that children would really enjoy that. And as the teacher, you can also see immediately if the child has understood and can recognize that e sound. Another example of a game, and it's one that children really enjoy, is called Play a Word Guessing Game. Now, in this game, all of the learners' answers should begin with the sound m, as in monkey. So what we would do, there would be some questions that you would ask, and when the students supply the correct answer, the word would begin with the m sound. So let's look at some questions that might be asked. What is white, good to drink, and comes from a cow? The students would respond, hopefully, milk. And of course that begins with the sound m. Another question might be, what does a cat say? The answer to that would be meow. And of course that begins again with the m sound. What animal can swing by its tail and make funny faces? The answer there, of course, is monkey. Again, it begins with the m sound. And the m sound is that letter sound combination that you're trying to teach to your students. Another example question would be, what day comes after Sunday? Well, of course, the response there is Monday. Well, of course, with young learners, teachers should not teach all of the sound symbol correspondence at one time. That would be too much for most learners to comprehend. For instance, in many first language classrooms, students learn one sound symbol correspondence each week. There are also various crafts that teachers can do with learners to make learning more tactile. Let's look at an example of that. You might like to have your students draw a turkey. What you would do was each student would have some paper, some coloured pencils, and you'd ask the learners to spread their fingers out on that piece of paper and then trace around their hand. Once they've done that, you could explain that the thumb would make the head of the turkey. So on the head of the turkey, they could draw a beak, perhaps put an eye. The fingers, they could become some of the feathers. And then, to be creative, the children might wish to add some legs. Then they could colour everything in so it looks very pretty. Well, now how could you use that for some sound symbol correspondence? Well, you could select certain features and then perhaps look at the beginning sound. For example, you know it's a turkey. You could use that to focus on the t sound, t for turkey. You could then look at the individual parts of the turkey. The sound f, of course, corresponds to the beginning sound of the feathers and the feet. The sound w, for example, is the first sound in the word wings. Next, you can have the b sound, and that could be used for the beak. You could also use the b sound to introduce the colours, brown, for example. And speaking of colours, you can also look at the sound of r, which begins the word red. Well, there are many resources on the internet, and you can find many different websites that will give you some ideas of teaching this letter and sound correspondence. And we have two here that you might find particularly useful: Mrs. Jones' Room and Super Teacher Worksheets. So I hope those help you find some very creative and fun sound symbol correspondence lessons for your young learners. Let's look now at matching sounds to letter clusters and to word families that they represent. Well, as learners progress in their reading skills, the teacher can teach commonly used letter clusters. Well, what's a letter cluster? A letter cluster is a group of letters that commonly occur in words and usually contain one or two letters. Let's look now at some example letter clusters. We have the ch, the ch, as in chin, cheese and chicken. We have the tr, as in train, truck and trash. And we have the str, as in street, straight and strong. And again, there are many ways to go about raising learner awareness to these correspondences of the sounds and the letter clusters. One example of this is a listening game, and the title of this game is Beginning, Middle or End. Now, for the purposes of today's presentation, we're going to focus on the sound sh. And what we want the students to do is listen and let us know where they hear the sh sound in the following words. They would need to respond whether they hear the sound at the beginning of the word, in the middle of the word, or at the end of the word. So let's listen to these words, and you can play along as you listen and decide whether it's in the beginning, the middle, or the end. Sheet, goldfish, share, shell, washer, shapes, push-up, flash, shadow, cashew, trash, bashful, shower, ship, starfish, radish, push, shark, shirt, fisherman, fish. As an additional follow-up activity, you can ask the students which is there the most of, beginning sounds, middle sounds, or ending sounds. For an additional challenge, the teacher might like to add the word sugar. This can help learners to listen for the corresponding sound, as well as introduce them to the fact that there's not always a correspondence between pronunciation and spelling. In the list of words I read out, those words all had SH. But of course with sugar, there's no H in the spelling. We have another fun activity, and this one is having fun with the ch sound. We could begin by looking at animals. Let's think. The ch animals, how many can you name? And then you would encourage your students to think of as many animals as they can whose names begin with ch. For example, cheetah, chicken, chickadee, chow chow, chihuahua. Let's say you have a group of learners that particularly like food. Well, you can have an alternative version of that activity. Instead of naming animals that begin with ch, you would ask them to think of foods that begin with the ch sound. How many can they name? Some examples that they might come up with would be chips, chili, chicken, Chinese food, cheeseburger, Cheerios, chocolate, chowder, and cheese. There's quite a lot for that group. Another way of introducing the ch sound is by cutting some paper strips of all different colours and making a paper chain. You've got the ch sound there with chain. You could make the paper chain and then hang it in the classroom, or perhaps students might want to hang a paper chain, up in their bedroom at home or their playroom. As I mentioned earlier, there's not always a correspondence between sounds and symbols. When teaching learners about such differences, you can use similar activities for teaching those that do have a correspondence. This activity is going to look at an example of when there is not a correspondence between sounds and symbols, and that's with the PH. When we see PH, it makes the F sound. It doesn't make the PH sound. So there is not that correspondence directly. So how can we introduce our students to this concept, that PH makes the F sound? Well, we're going to have a song again, and this is called the PH song. And it would be sung to the tune of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star.
PH, PH, what's your sound? Phone has the F sound and so does graph. Also so does alphabet. PH, PH, what's your sound?
So there's a lot of opportunities for the students to make that sound. A good website that introduces more ideas for teaching learners these clusters of letters and their corresponding sounds can be found at superteacherworksheets.com, and we've provided you the website address. The teacher can also teach about word families. Now in reading, word families are groups of words that have a common sound and spelling pattern. Let's look at some examples of phonetic word families. We have a chart here, and I'll read them for you. The first column is from the family which has the sound ak. A-C-K. We have black, back, backpack, snack and sack. The next one has a Y, the A sound. Day, grey, play, say and today. Next we have EST, which is pronounced est, as in the words best, chest, nest, test and west. Next we have the letters I-G-H-T, which is pronounced ite, as in the words bright, fight, light, right and tonight. Next we have O-P, pronounced op, as in the words drop, hop, shop, stop and top. And finally we have the family with U-C-K, pronounced uck, as in the words duck, cluck, luck, truck and yuck. Well, notice how all those words in each column all contain the same pattern. And when words have the same pattern, we say that they rhyme. And rhyme means that there is a correspondence of sound between words or the ending of words. Another fun and engaging activity is a word search. And a word search is a puzzle which requires learners to find particular words in that puzzle. Now, we're focusing on word families, and we can adapt that word search to use it to introduce learners to a word family or help them practice with that word family. For this example, we're going to look at a word search based on the word family ache, A-K-E. So we have an example here of a word family, and you can see there are various words that contain that sound, ache, the A-K-E, hidden in the puzzle. We have the words bake, break, cake, flake, lake, make, mistake, shake, snake and steak. And of course you could create your own word puzzle and match that to whatever word family it is that you're working on with your students. Another activity that's very engaging is the use of tongue twisters. Again, and when you're looking at this sound symbol correspondence, you could select tongue twisters that include the feature that you wish to introduce to your students or to have your students practice. Here's a tongue twister for you. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? As you can see, there are a number of different sound symbol correspondences that you could focus on in that tongue twister. You have the W from wood, woodchuck, woodchuck, wood. You also have the UCK, the uck sound, as in woodchuck, chuck, woodchuck, chuck, and so on. So tongue twisters are usually fun for young learners. When teaching this sound symbol correspondence, this also creates an opportunity to use familiar songs and rhymes. And this can be used particularly to focus children's attention on patterns. An example that we'll look at today is the Humpty Dumpty rhyme, and this can be used to show learners the word family all. Let's look at that rhyme now. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. And you can see examples of that word family all in the word wall, fall, all, and all. Well, let's move on now to an activity which we're going to call rhyme time. And this is a way of introducing or practicing with your students more of these word families. What you would do would be select the word family that you wish to focus on. For the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to have each word that will begin with the same sound as radio begins with, that R sound. And what the teacher would do would be tell the students about some words that the teacher has in his or her mind. So they would tell the students something about those words, and the student would have to guess the word. And remember, it will begin with the same sound as radio, the R sound. So here are some examples. The teacher could say to the students, "This is one of your hands. Its name rhymes with light. What is it?" The students hopefully would then respond with the word right. And of course, right begins with that sound, the R sound, the same as radio, R. The next example, the teacher could say to the students, "This is what people drive on. Its name rhymes with toad. What is it?" The answer would be road. The teacher could tell the students, "This is a beautiful flower. Its name rhymes with nose. What is it?" The answer, of course, is rose. It has that R sound at the beginning and it rhymes with nose. Next, the teacher might say, "This is something we eat. It rhymes with nice. What is it?" The answer, of course, is rice. It begins with the R sound and it rhymes with nice, and it's something that we eat. And finally, the teacher could say, "This gets shot into space. It rhymes with pocket. What is it?" Of course, the answer is rocket because it rhymes with pocket, begins with the R sound, and it gets shot into space. I'd like to share a quote with you now from the researcher Pinter. Pinter observed that with phonics exercises, it's important to keep a balance between usefulness and pattern building. If the meanings are unknown, long lists of words exemplifying the same pattern are not useful to children. So with this in mind, when using the phonics approach to reading, teachers must always remember that the ultimate goal of reading is comprehension. Well, we were looking at word families, and for a list of commonly used word families, please visit Enchanted Learning at this website address. Now we're going to look at matching the sounds to the words they represent. So far, we've looked at how sounds correspond to letters and how sounds correspond to clusters of letters and word families. But now we're going to address the teaching of words. Now, most people think that children learn to read using their eyes. However, as we've seen, reading is actually learned through the ears. That is through listening. For instance, with the word apple, we do not say the letters A, P, P, L, E, we say apple. Well, in regards to pronunciation and reading, many of the activities that we've already talked about can be used to teach words. The learner's job will be to sound out the letters that they've learned to make a word. Well, another great way to teach words is to read stories to students and to help them read familiar words by sounding them out. When teaching learners how to read words, it's important that they have many opportunities. Firstly, to hear the word, listening, to say the word, as in speaking, to read the word, that is reading, and when developmentally ready, to write out the word. That's when they are writing. Now, there are many useful websites, as we know, and in particular, we have a website that contains many helpful worksheets for teaching words through phonics. And you may wish to check out this website, superteacherworksheets.com/phonics. Let's move on now to sounding out sentences that have sound symbol correspondence. Well, as with earlier activities, there are many different ways that we can use. And for this topic, there are many ways to teach the reading of sentences using phonics. Many times, when teaching young learners to read sentences, teachers use word families, rhymes, songs, chants, and simple picture books which have one sentence on each page. Well, let's look now at some activities that we can use in our classrooms. For simple sentences, teachers can help learners by reading simple sentences, such as the following. The rat is on the mat. The cat is wearing a hat. I want that bat. I sat on the mat. Well, you can see those are simple sentences, and with the teacher's help, the learners should be able to sound out those sentences. Another activity is what we call scrambled sentences. Now, for this activity, the teacher can make similar sentences for their learners. They can then take these words from the sentences and put them onto cards. The next step is to give those cards to the students, but you give them the cards out of order. This not only helps the learners with their reading and pronunciation skills, but it helps them with their grammar skills, because they'll need to bring all this knowledge as they work out how to put the sentence together in a logical manner, how to put those word cards back into the correct order to make a logical sentence. As learners progress in their reading, grammar skills and so on, this technique can be used with more difficult sentences as well. Let's look now at mini-books. Teachers can find mini-books or even create mini-books for their learners. You can also have learners create their own mini-books using pictures, or they can use pictures and words. Let's look at an example mini-book, and this mini-book focuses on the E sound, as in C and B. And a mini-book such as this can help to reinforce earlier learning, and in addition, the pictures can help to reinforce the meaning of the words. Let's say now that your students have accomplished reading words and they've accomplished reading sentences and they've used the mini-books. Now it's time to move on to reading sentences in a text. At this stage of the reading process, learners move from sentences to longer texts. And in this stage of the reading process, teachers commonly use picture books, short passages, or graded readers. In the classroom, teachers generally focus on intensive reading. Intensive reading involves reading a short passage or text in order to develop specific reading strategies and to focus on accuracy. Let's take a moment now to look at specific reading strategies and focusing on accuracy. Well, for a reading strategy, teachers may, for instance, use a graphic organizer to help learners to take information from a text and to put it into a chart. Graphic organizers help in comprehending the text and in developing the learner's cognitive skills. Looking now at accuracy. Intensive reading also may focus more on grammatical structures, the meanings of words and so on. Intensive reading encourages the use of what we call bottom-up processing. With bottom-up processing, the reader uses knowledge of individual letter sounds and sounds of words to figure out what the sentence or passage is all about. And it's really at this stage of the learning process that it's important for teachers and parents to encourage learners to do extensive reading outside of the classroom. So let's take a moment now to look at extensive reading. Extensive reading means reading silently for extended periods of time. Teachers should have lots of age-appropriate and level-appropriate reading materials available for their learners to read for a specified period of time in the classroom and/or at home. Extensive reading encourages top-down processing. Now, top-down processing is when the learners use their background knowledge of the content to help with comprehending the text. And learners can use their background knowledge and the context of the text to compensate for unknown words as well. Earlier I mentioned graded readers, and graded readers are an excellent resource for extensive reading because the reading is at the learner's current level of competence or slightly above the current level. And graded readers, therefore, are a great source of comprehensible input for learners. Graded readers are designed to help learners to enjoy and become confident with reading. And they are an excellent way to acquire new vocabulary in context. Well, with both intensive and extensive reading, it's important that the texts meet certain criteria. The texts should be at the appropriate level for learners. They should be interesting to the learners and, of course, be connected to the learners' lives and their background knowledge. Well, in regards to pronunciation, the phonics approach to reading really focuses on the segmental features of the language, the vowels, the consonants, etc. But it doesn't focus very much on the suprasegmental features, such as stress, rhythm, and intonation. So when teaching the reading of words and sentences and longer texts, teachers should raise learner awareness to some of the suprasegmental features that occur as well. Well, once again, we really have looked in depth at our week's topic, so it's now time to review the goals. By now, you should be able to demonstrate familiarity with practical classroom techniques for teaching reading and pronunciation, to differentiate bottom-up processing and top-down processing in reading, to explain the two approaches used to teach reading and the criticisms of both, to discuss the various steps of teaching reading and pronunciation using the phonics approach, to provide your own examples for teaching reading through phonics, and finally to explain intensive reading and extensive reading. I hope you've enjoyed our look this week at pronunciation and reading and phonics. I look forward to seeing you again next week.